And that's when one of the supervisors said, well, I think you need to check your privilege. And I was just like, whoa. And then started the process of like, well, if you're okay with this, then you need to apologize to your colleagues who are experiencing all these stressors and feel threatened and are worried for their lives. You need to apologize to them. And I said, apologize for what?
Welcome to the Reality Therapy Podcast, where the truth will set you free.
Welcome to the Reality Therapy Podcast. I'm here today with the academically weaponized redneck, Adam Luke, who's a licensed marriage and family therapist. Great to have you on, Adam. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I can't wait to be here. I guess I am here, but to really just have a conversation.
Awesome. Yeah. So let's start us off. Tell us who you are, where you come from.
My name's Adam Luke. The title isn't wrong. I am an academically weaponized redneck. I was raised all over America. I was raised in Illinois, North Carolina, California. I now hail from Tennessee. I've been a licensed marriage and family therapist working in the field since 2014. What drew me to the field was questions. I had questions growing up. Basically, in the family that I grew up in the community I grew up in, is there any ways we could do things differently? And that's just sort of where my mind went. But I experienced a lot of challenges coming from, I don't know, rural conservative America on sort of joining in this process of let's find out what therapy is, what is psychology, how do I get an education, how do I fit into practicum? Because I definitely had no birthright to this industry. I had nothing that cemented a legacy in which I was following.
Mm. Yeah, we were talking about this a second ago, right before we hit record, and I was like, we got to hit record. But there's something about academia, and it doesn't seem like it's the most intelligent people that are like filtered there. Like there's something else, and it seems like you have to be socialized into a specific type of culture, and kind of like there's like all these invisible landmines that if you're not socialized into it, you don't know. Like it's almost like if you're at a fancy dinner party a few generations ago, it's like which soup goes with spoon, which spoon goes with soup, which fork goes with the salad.
Yeah.
All these little etiquette and rules, and like you're just kind of expected to know all those rules going into academia. And some of us who come from different backgrounds don't know all those special rules.
Yeah, I think I ticked off a lot of people because I talk about a superpower I think I have, which is toxic curiosity. So I just ask why, right? I am that 2-year-old still. Why do we do this thing? And I wasn't used to people saying, well, this is always the way that we've done it. We do it this way and that's the only way. And I was like, oh, but couldn't we do things differently? So I think you're right in the fact that it's interesting that as we have moved to try to be more inclusive as a culture, we've created these artificial, invisible barriers for other people, right? Because if it's almost like I call them social frat clubs, where, like you said, there's this secret menu that other people know they can order off of or how to behave, but I don't know that. And because I don't know that, I come into processes as handicapped. Right before you hit record, we were talking about, I recognize I don't have a legacy. My dad was a tool and die maker. My mom never graduated college. So I didn't have people to draw upon on getting like practicum sites or, how about writing references to even get into grad school, right? These are things that I never saw them as, oh, I'm at a deficit. But then when you sort of come into this process, people see those things as deficits. I saw them as opportunities.
That's interesting. I'm thinking of you talk about like it's like this elite club, and we talk a lot about diversity. And I love this quote by Thomas Sowell, where it's something like we've created this elite class of people where they all look very different and all think exactly the same.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, it's crazy to think that as we have tried to increase our individuality, we've actually made more cookie cutters. We've actually lost our soul in that way. That's why, like, when people come sit down with me for therapy, I ask a lot of questions in the way of like, what do you want? And normally the first process in them, the first few steps, is people will outline sort of all the roles that have been handed to them, what other people have wanted for them. Well, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. I've been told I'm good at that. You may very well be good at that, but is that something that intrinsically you want to do? And that's what sort of just pushed me along in this process, because I look back on it and there were a lot of nights that, like, I was in tears, I was upset, I felt like I was facing absolute adversity in trying to do this. I should probably open up on this. So my jump to psychology wasn't a, like, I always wanted to be a therapist. I was working as a mechanic, and I basically looked around at people around me and said, hey, everyone who has helped me get into being a mechanic, they're 45, 50 years old and their bodies are falling apart, right? And I also looked at, like, just a lot of these individuals had unhealthy relationships with their families, and being a full-time mechanic was not going to be conducive to the family life that I wanted. So I was like, hey, I'm really good at fixing cars. Maybe I try fixing people. So, like, because I always loved having conversations, and people were like, you love people, so why don't you go into a field where you can work with people? And I'll never forget, there were times where I would go to class and I'd be in my mechanic's outfit. I'd have oil all over me and stuff like that. And I just sort of was brushing up this against this. It felt like this adversity of, well, why are you here? Like, why would you want to do this? You don't. And the real takeaway here was that I wanted to help people. I wanted to be able to also be someone in this industry that I had been looking for, because I had been in therapy earlier in my life and I couldn't find anyone who looked like me, sounded like me, related with me. And I had experienced those processes of, almost therapy had to be a session where I was hating my dad or hating my mother or hating my family, instead of saying, hey, these are all challenges you've experienced, but what are you going to do with your life? What are the goals that you have for yourself? Have you ever even conceptualized those? It was more of a commiserating in the therapy process than a freeing one.
Hmm. So you're telling me about difficulties you had finding a practicum site. Can you tell me about that?
And so I interviewed at 17 different practicum sites. Again, I am kind of a optimistic individual. So when I was like, oh, I'll just go interview for like 6 of them, and 6 of them were like, nope. And then I was like, well, I'll do 6 more. And then when we started to get towards 15, I started to really wonder, like, I remember sitting in the office of the woman who ran the practicum training side of my program, and I was in tears. I said, I guess I don't fit, right? And I'll never forget her. Her name was Lisa Wilson. She passed away, but she was like, no, you're needed here and you're going to have to carve out your niche. She dropped this thought on me, which has been a core belief in the rest of my life, is instead of looking for a door to open, it's time to build your own. So I was just like, all right. And so we started really looking at, like, why was I getting turned down for practicum sites? And this was the other thing. People didn't like my beard. People didn't like things that I couldn't control. I'm 6'5" and 300 pounds. And so they're saying, like, he has a really physically imposing presence, and we just think that that's going to be hard for him to overcome in the therapy space. And I'll never forget her. She was smacking people back left and right. Like, you can't actually tell him that. You can't, that cannot be the reason. If you're saying that you like everything about him but this, I don't know what to do with the fact that that's open discrimination.
Hmm. So, gosh, that's terrible. Like, how did they respond when when the message came out, like, you're openly discriminating against this man?
This is the crazy thing, and I think it was eye-opening for her in the process, was the therapy profession is really close-knit, right? So we felt that the practicum sites were kind of all like, if we have each other's backs, we're not going to really change in this. And that was the first time I felt like Lisa had experienced, like, wow, there's actually the things that we are prepared for in imagining what discrimination looks like is different than how I'm experiencing discrimination in this. And um, it blew me away that, again, directors of sites were admitting, like, yeah, we shouldn't not be hiring you, but we're going to subjectively put this off of, we don't think that you can make the turn. Now, I look in retrospect and I'm actually quite thankful. I'm quite thankful that I didn't go to certain sites that I think wouldn't have been challenging me clinically, and instead would have been sort of more focused on a narrative of how they provide therapy, because my first 1,800 hours of doing this went into working with childhood victims of sexual abuse. And I'll tell you, that 17th place that I interviewed was the last place I wanted to interview, because I just said, I have gone through enough in my own life story. I don't think I want to work in that space. And I really feel like it was a Jonah part of my story where God was like, well, sorry, you're going to get there one way or another. So do I regret what happened to me? No, but it was eye-opening in the fact that that was the beginning of my thought process of, I can't be like everyone else, and I refuse to try to be like everyone else.
I feel like that could be like the tagline of a movie, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, because once I got through the majority of my hours, I found myself back into a similar spot where I got hired on by, like, one of the best private practices in Orange County, California, and I had wonderful surveys. I had a constant, steady stream of clients. I thought I had made it, and I thought that this place was where I was going to work for the, like, rest of my life. I'll never forget getting called in and being told, "Hey, we just don't think you're a good fit." And I had to, like, what do you mean that I'm not a good fit? And they were like, "Well, we're not, we don't think that your core beliefs align with our core beliefs." And I remember being just kind of blown away, because this was a faith-based practice. Like, I'm a Christian. I love spiritual integration. But it was, again, another caveat of, are you willing to give us just a little bit more? Are you willing to change your beliefs? Instead of iron sharpens iron, are you willing to become complacent and complicit in what we believe? And that was rough. I mean, it happened. I'll go into it. I was working with this place, and Donald Trump was elected for the first time, and I was not someone. I didn't have the MAGA bumper sticker on my car. I wasn't rolling in with my red caps, but I remember we did it like an all hands on deck staff meeting, and it was a place so that people could decompress from the stressors of the information that had just been released the night before, which was that he got elected. And they said, we're going to carve out 2 hours of time. And I was sitting there thinking, well, wait a second, 2 hours of admin time would be wonderful to do notes, this, that, and the other. So I said, if I don't feel like I need to share anything personally, can I go ahead and use that time for something else? And that's when one of the supervisors said, well, I think you need to check your privilege. And I was just like, whoa. And then started the process of, like, well, if you're okay with this, then you need to apologize to your colleagues who are experiencing all these stressors and feel threatened and are worried for their lives. You need to apologize to them. And I said, apologize for what? He's not even the president. Like, he won, but he's not the president yet. Nothing has happened. I can't apologize for things that are not happening. And I think that we're jumping the shark here by saying that I have voted for him or this is what I want. I'm just saying that I think that it would take away from the process for me to sit here when I'm not grieving. That's not my spot. And then it was 2 weeks later that I got called in and said, we don't think that you're a good fit.
Wow. I don't feel the need to cry because Orange Man bad, therefore you're not a good fit here. That
Yeah,
seems,
and
that seems so bizarre.
It was another fracturing of my psyche of, like,
Man.
whoa, like, I could understand if I came in and I said it just like that. I appreciate how you're like, orange man bad, like that's not me, like go MAGA, out the door I walk. That would be something different than just saying, I don't have anything to share. I don't need to process this. Because I'm also not going to let whoever happens to be in the office to have more power and control over my life than they really have. Like that, if we want to really get down to the brass tacks of it, um, I always say, like, I must be the worst conservative ever because I made more money and bought a house during Biden's administration than I have under any Republican. And people go, what do you mean by that? I was like, because I didn't care. I didn't care that Biden was president. You know what I did care about? How I was going to provide for my family. So I kept stacking wins while everyone wants to sit with, oh, these 4 years, I'm not going to apply myself. The next 4 years, I will. It's a thought process I can't align with. But there is this process of, oh no, if Donald Trump gets in, then we're all supposed to say how miserable the world is. That's commiserating. That's not based in reality. And you're not going to be able to blame other people for failing to meet the trajectory in your own life.
I think, from people like you and I, or the conference that we were at not too long ago,
Yeah.
when we're saying these things in those type of settings, this sounds absolutely absurd. But I think if we were to step back and put ourselves in their shoes, it would seem so common sense. If someone's not willing to talk about how tore up they are that Donald Trump is president, even if we don't know how they voted, if this person is not upset that Donald Trump is president, that's not our people. That's just so common sense to them. It gets back to these like socialized into that culture. If you're socialized into that culture, that's just blatantly obvious. We wouldn't want someone who's even sympathetic in any way to Trump in our territory.
I start worrying about the blind spots we start creating, right? Like when we start making people binary, there's an issue there because you're good or you're bad. You're an asset or you're not. You're an asset or you're a liability. And that's, I think that's only adding to sort of the social chaos that we're experiencing because it might be really easy when you're virtue signaling to feel like you're doing the right thing. When you're holding the sides, you're in signs, you're beating the pots and pans, you're doing everything that you're socially told that you're supposed to. But what happens once you start having a conscience? I see this a lot with my clients that I work with that are part of the transgender community. You know, might blow people away. Adam, you look like an emotional truck driver. You list yourself as a conservative therapist, and people from the LGBTQ community are coming to see you. I don't think that I have any lock on that community. The thing that I think they come to me for is the fact that, again, that toxic curiosity is going to come out. I'm going to be asking you questions. I want to know why you believe because I need you to know why you believe. And so we see that a lot in the transgender community that they may start down that process of saying, hey, I identify with certain identity politics or whatnot, but then it normally gets to a position where they're like, well, I don't know why I need to cast away my family, or I don't know why I need to give you more, right? There's always this process, it seems like, in the culture that we're navigating in Western culture, it's almost ritualistic. It always is asking for one more thing, and that one more thing is that slow, slippery slope. I like to call it a drift, where you drift a little bit and a little bit and a little bit, and before you know it, you can't recognize who you are.
Hmm. That is interesting. Yeah, I feel like what did you call it? Toxic curiosity. I feel like the way I was kind of trained in my grad program is that like high level of curiosity would be very appropriate if I were treating a heterosexual white man. Your playbook is basically open. If you're treating a heterosexual white man, you can use all the different various forms of therapy and different
Mm-hmm.
techniques and this and that. But as soon as you get someone from these certain silos, like you said,
Mm-hmm.
LGBTQ, really the only appropriate therapy is affirm and validate and tell them how wonderful they are. So when you kind of step back and think about it, I'm giving better care to a heterosexual white man than I am to any of these, so-called marginalized communities.
Yeah, imagine if, I mean, this might be a little to the extreme, but imagine if, like in physical, if we were looking at how we medically work with individuals through physical symptoms. Imagine if some arbitrary threshold was met where you couldn't prescribe insulin to a person that needed insulin. Like that, we're actually holding back modalities for people because we go to reaffirming the reason why I question it so much is because I've sat with victims of sexual abuse that I would actually be reaffirming the negative narrative or cognition that was given to them, right? So what if I moved into sexual liberation with a client who's experienced massive sexual trauma, and I'm not saying that most or all of them are like this, but just imagine for a second someone who has been increasingly objectified, who has learned that their integration with society is largely transactional through sexual acts. If I'm reaffirming that, am I actually helping that person escape their own prison, or am I helping them build better bars? And that's where I get nervous is I will affirm you absolutely if you can tell me what you believe. Because if you can identify to me why you believe something, why you feel rooted in something, then I know that I can walk with you as a fellow traveler in this journey and help you better develop that intuition and that self-advocacy that's going to make this journey survivable.
Wow. So let's back up a second. When did you graduate with your master's?
So I graduated with my master's in 2015. I started my practicum in 2014.
What was your graduate school experience like? Do you feel like you were trained well? Do you feel like there was political bias? What was that experience like?
Great question. So I loved my grad program. I felt like it was for me. I went to Hope International University. For me, I loved the amount of spiritual integration they had in it. Every single course that we did had a level of spiritual integration, and I knew from the beginning I wanted to be a faith-based therapist. So for me, I felt like this was exactly where I needed to be. I think for the challenges that I experienced were really good. Where I started to feel it go sideways was actually after graduation, and I think if you actually roll this back a little bit and you look time-wise, that 2015 year was a lot of big changes within our industries. You started to actually see what I would say is the weaponization of our marriage and family therapist associations start. You started to see sort of the hostile takeovers of this group think where board members who maybe our boards were more evenly balanced, all of a sudden people started getting left off. And you started to feel what I have said, it feels like a zero-sum game. Like we are trying to just march toward our own confirmation bias. And so after 2015, I actually got into teaching in higher education. So I've been teaching since 2015. And I will say, to the detriment of a lot of other people, I've noticed that there has been this harsh change of instead of the curiosity of empowering future clinicians, we are trying to build um, concrete ceilings where no, I need you to think in a box. Well, here's a problem. No person that walks through your door as a therapist is a box. But it's almost like we have academically weaponized stereotyping and discrimination as somehow assessment tools. Like, I'm going to say something that is controversial, but we see it more and more as therapists today. As you'll see referrals go out. That referrals will seek, don't respond if you're a white cis male, or you'll see, I mean, we're all in them. We're in the Facebook groups. We're in the professional where the referral is maybe an African American male, and then if you apply yourself for I would love to be a resource, you start to get the criticisms of, well, let's leave room for other BIPOC therapists. And I didn't realize that me raising my hand was stealing a space from a BIPOC therapist. So how do we navigate these things? Because we're essentially being told, oh no, if you're African American, you can only work with an African American therapist. If you're white, only with another white therapist. Like we're starting to draw it in where we're making whole segments of this population caricatures of our own ignorance.
This feels such like a navel gazing narcissism. And I'm thinking of, I don't want to throw too many stones because I'm an addict who like recovering addict who works in the addiction population, but I'll see people. It's like, I want to work with females who discovered late in life they were autistic, or I want to work with first generation immigrants who are LGBTQIA. Like very specific things. Like I want to work with someone exactly like myself. And like it just seems like part of the benefit that I think you're supposed to get out of therapy is bouncing ideas off of a person who's different from you to get a different perspective. Does that make sense?
Correct. Therapy is not supposed to be an echo chamber.
Yeah.
And that is what I feel like we're moving towards as an industry, is this pseudo belief that the safety is in the reassurance of destructive behavioral patterns. Like at some point we do have to sit back and say, okay, like, again, I work with a lot of polyamorous couples. Don't know how they fall into my lap, but I feel it's a little bit like Harry Potter. The wand chooses you, right? I'm not gonna.
Well,
I'm not gonna.
they probably fall into a lot of different laps. Is that inappropriate?
As long as this is there's fair communication in the relationship, you are able to transfer into as many laps as you want. But the reality here, that was a really good plug. I like that one. What's interesting about this is I'll sit down with polyamorous couples and they will tell me, oh man, everyone has told me that this is going to be the best thing for our relationship. And there is this newness to the experience at the beginning. And I think it is a lot like, dare I say, the church camp high, right? Like there's a lot of, oh wow, this is fresh, this is new, this is exciting. And then as you walk through this process, two individuals who are maybe in a committed relationship recognize, like, wait a second, as we create more seats at this table, I feel more and more distant from you instead of close. But God forbid you actually say that to the polyamorous couple of like, well, wait a second, I'm just paying attention to the information you're sharing with me. And I'm hearing you guys say, without using these words, you're uncomfortable. Like, how is that me? I'm not trying to reaffirm or not affirm, but if you're telling me that you're feeling a discomfort, isn't it actually malpractice for me not to point that out?
Have you read The Ethical Slut?
Yes.
I had to read that for grad school for my marriage and family counseling class. I had to read The Ethical Slut, and it's just like a kind of a glorification of that polyamory. But everyone you talk to has like a much like a jaded, if they've been doing it for a while, like have a jaded experience. Like there's a lot of pain you invite into your life that you don't think about when you're kind of reading what's essentially like polyamory propaganda, like Ethical Slut.
Mm-hmm. And so I think where that book is great as a, man, how do I want to, it's great as a highlight reel. It speaks to all the positive or the perceived positive effects of polyamory on a committed relationship. Now, the other aspect of it is sometimes I've asked my couples that sit down with me, like, do you feel like there's safety in this relationship? Because if there's 3 or 4 of you or whatever it might be, that means that you only have to give a certain percentage of yourself to each other. Like, I think that the reason why a committed relationship with a husband and wife feels so vulnerable is because there's such a high level of exposure between two people, right? I get to see you at your barest. Now, if I invite more people in, I actually lower the percentage that I am spending time with you, with this other person, and I'm actually able to reach a level where I'm comfortable with the level of disclosure I have with you based on the fact that I'm always moving through a different relationship with someone else.
Wow. I want to see if we can flesh that out in terms of like a broader societal trend, because we're seeing a decline in marriage rates, a decline in birth rates, things like that. And,
it's not because sex is not fun. Okay.
Yeah, it's still fun.
Sex is still rated 10 out of 10, right? From
Sodom
and Gomorrah to today, still good, right? Like there's no, there has been no sexual inflation.
Right,
There's no cheapening of that dollar. But I will, so yes, I believe that in ways, and I don't want to, again, I don't like to use broad brushes. I'm not saying this is for everyone, but I think that there's a benefit of polyamory in the active disassociation. And if you actually
Mm.
look at our society right now, we are stuck in active disassociation generators. Everything in front of us is really designed to take us out of the present. Like it blows me away when I do a lot of couples counseling. When I sit down, I say, how do you spend time together? And they're like, well, we Netflix.
Yeah.
It's like, no doubt that's how you spend time together, but you both are having individual experiences as you're watching that show. You're not communicating. And then something that I've just recently started to pay attention to is, like, just sort of take a snapshot in your head of your living room and do me a favor and think you and your wife, you and your girlfriend, whoever, you and your significant other are sitting there watching a movie. What are you doing? In some aspects, people will paint you the picture of like, well, she's on her side of the couch and I'm on my side of the couch. Like, we have actually been molded as a society not to spend physical space together. Like, I believe that God ain't stupid. He knows that if you can get a man and a woman to be touching each other, biology will take over, right? But we have found so many sweaters and blankets to
Mm.
put between us so that we don't have those points of contact anymore.
To me, it seems like in terms of people not getting married at all, it seems like there's this fear. You see so many horror stories of relationships and marriages that don't pan out and things go wrong and there's so much hurt and
Mhm.
divorce and all this stuff. And you think, I could not imagine one person meeting all of my needs for all of the rest of my life.
Mm.
So you have this kind of Hail Mary in the form of polyamory. Well, maybe I'll just like distribute these needs
Yeah.
and maybe I can make it work that way.
Mm-hmm. What's crazy is how we pigeonhole the dyad of marriage when we go, oh, well, one person is not going to be able to meet my needs for the rest of my life. When you recognize that that person that you marry on your wedding day is not the person that's next to you on your deathbed. So,
Mm.
like, the idea that people don't dynamically grow and change through marriage is kind of ridiculous. Now, there are people that, yes, they end up in couples therapy because they are rigid and they don't want to change. That's a committed relationship forces you to change. There's no way for me to stay the same. Why? Because when you're a unique individual making a decision to live life in collaboration with another unique individual, there are going to be changes that happen. And so when people talk about the boring aspect of marriage, I always ask, well, so go ahead and outline to me how marriage has been role modeled to you, right? It's the easiest intervention because people will start outlining all the terrible marriages that have been role modeled to. So yeah, absolutely. You sound like you have a wealth of knowledge about failed marriages, but that
Mm.
doesn't mean that you have a wealth of knowledge in successful ones.
Mm.
Just because
Okay.
you know the worst about it doesn't mean that you know what the best is like.
Mm.
And
Wow.
that's the confirmation bias. If I'm sitting with another person who's been betrayed by relationships, they're going to riff, yeah, it's terrible. Why would you ever want to do that? In that moment, am I a therapist or am I just recruiting someone to my own negatively held beliefs?
So, in my congressional hearing here, I'm going to ask you, where were you on January 6th?
Well, I was there. I was absolutely there. We got there at 4:30 in the morning to get standing in line. We basically had standing room only. I'm gonna screw it up because there was two sides of it. There was the mall aspect, which most people already know about. That's where a lot of the clashing with the authorities happened. But then there was another, basically on the backside of the White House, where there's another. Um, Basically, that's where Trump gave his speech, right? And what blew me away was being there, and then watching the news after the fact. Because what I think needs to be shared is, like, when we were there, you're surrounded by hundreds of thousands of people who are the most polite people polite strangers you've ever been around. We kept on talking about that with the group I was with, is people would bump into you and immediately say sorry, right? But it was literally, we're packed in there like sardines. Um, and the extremists were singing the national anthem, Silent Night, uh, um, oh man, what were the other ones? But I mean, like, it was such a experience to sit and be surrounded by other people that just had love for their country. And then what really surprised me was you had other individuals from other countries that were coming around speaking about how America couldn't fall. If America fell, it was the last lighthouse globally for there being freedom, for there being justice. And that was what actually sort of broke me down. I would get teary because there were people from China speaking about the atrocities that they were experiencing, the fact that there is no way to move throughout their society, that you can be, I don't know how many people are aware of it, but just look up Uyghurs, in the fact that there is absolutely ethnic cleansing that's going on in China and no one wants to talk about it. And these people were in front of us saying, please don't let this happen to your country. Or there were delegates from Vietnam that were talking about the same thing. And so it was crazy to sit there and be surrounded by people who, again, were very conscientious, were courteous. At the end of Trump's speech, when he said, let's go and peacefully walk to the mall to have our voices heard. What blew us away is it felt like everyone had been camping at least once, because everyone broke out the Glad bags and were like, all right, trash, trash, trash. Like, there was just this, again, reverence for, you're standing around all these memorials, and we weren't there to riot. We were there to be heard. But what scared me the most was watching how that transitioned differently in the news. There was a definite narrative that showed up. If the mall was as dangerous as they said it was going to be, why did me and my friends walk by rows of cop cars and cruisers with police officers that were smiling and waving and talking to one another, if truly there was this um, invasion or attack that was happening? I will say I saw people doing things that were stupid. I don't think you need to be breaking windows. I don't think you need to be clashing with the police. But to put it in perspective, I don't even think you could say it was 1% of the people that were there. Most people there were, again, homeschooling parents, or as we were there, my wife and I just said, this is going to be a moment in history. We had grown up on the West Coast, and we said, we've never been this close to DC. Why not drive up? It takes a day to get there. Drive up there and just see it for our own eyes, so that we're not reading it out of a textbook or seeing it off of someone's well-edited video. I want to see it in real life.
Mm. So you are a man in the therapy profession, which makes you a small minority of people in that profession that in recent years has been a lot more heavily feminized. What can you tell me about the field from your perspective, specifically as a man?
Well, welcome to my TED Talk. That's a great question. I don't know how many feathers I'm going to ruffle in this, but I think that, like,
Ruffle them all.
well, so my background also, like, once I got licensed, I moved into working in congregate living facilities with addiction and treatment. Um, and what I noticed at that point was this recognition that men are pigeonholed, I feel like, when it comes from the psychological modalities that we come from. There's this idea of this, like, Neanderthal male, and that we all fit into that pattern. And so I think that in some ways, clinicians don't know what to do with men, because they want to work from the stereotype that they're all womanizing individuals. I think you get another challenge going on, which is hysterical, but our profession is largely made up of women. And so the idea of men stepping into this profession, it feels like I feel the same resistance as when women were entering the truck driving field, or when
Mm.
like women pipe fitters is actually happening more often than not now. There women are gravitating to the trades in ways largely like this is a random fact, but it's kind of cool. In the truck driving industry, women are flooding into it because it is probably one of the most accessible careers where you can make six figures and being a single mother. So a
Mhm.
lot of women are moving into that trade. What's interesting is a lot of the men then feel there's a scarcity mindset that jumps into that process. I see that same thing in the therapy space where like it's interesting that I can be around a lot of female therapists who will say, "Oh, would love to have a male to refer to as long as you think like me."
Uh,
Right? And so that's when I like to again, I just bring curiosity in the process. So I'm going to challenge held beliefs. Why? Because I don't think that all held beliefs are intrinsically virtuous. They're sometimes made up out of convenience. So I like to move past like, okay, so if toxic masculinity exists, are we going to call out that toxic femininity exists? Like can that be there? And it's interesting to watch people squirm on that thought process, but we absolutely know that it does, that toxic feminism does exist. But the idea of calling it out is, again, to your point, it's like, it's one of those forbidden things, like he who shall not be named. Like you can't say these things out loud. When in reality, the lack of being objective in asking these questions is only reaffirming more of the disassociation we're navigating.
so one of the things that I see from a lot of female therapists is to treat men as though our natural state is that we're kind of like defective women. Like we need to be fixed of our masculinity so that we can be appropriate, which is more like a woman. I observed a female clinician go into a men's group therapy, and just opening question right off the bat is, "How has your masculinity hurt you?" And I feel like there's just a really, and I don't think it's malicious most of the time, but there's a huge misunderstanding by a feminized field of how to treat men.
So help me understand how it has ever been constructive that we've been able to push a person into loving themselves by better hating a part of them.
Hmm.
Like the thing that I grabbed out of my addiction work is we're never going to be able to shame and guilt a person enough to make meaningful change in their life. Well, so if we sit down with men and we essentially say, you are fatalized to not have the relationships you want, the life that you want based off of things that you absolutely can't control, like whether or not being born with testicles. How do we give that person any hope? And it's not hope. Really, what we're doing is we're manufacturing, are you willing to live in this box? Are you willing to live these ways? And what we can actually talk to is for the last 40 or 50 years, feminism has gotten everything it has wanted socially. Like, and this isn't a war against feminism. What I'm talking about is, okay, if over the last 40 or 50 years, everything that those individuals said they needed to be fulfilled in their life, we should be living in a utopia. Yet we're actually seeing higher levels of dissatisfaction than ever before, right? Women are not more empowered in the relationships that they have. They feel more stuck in the relationships they have. They may have conquered toxic masculinity, but what do you do with complacent masculinity? Like women are actually saying, I'm frustrated that I have to be the masculine presence in the relationship when for the last 40, 50 years we've been telling ourselves that male masculinity cannot exist. So you're actually hearing more women from the feminine position say, we don't want to be masculine anymore. We want other people. Well, what does that look like? It sounds like it's the system coming back, the pendulum swinging the other direction. That maybe it wasn't toxic masculinity. Maybe again, the masculinity definition that you have was based off of primarily seeing the worst in the way of the definition, those who define masculinity.
How can we get more men to come to therapy? Or do we need men to come to therapy?
Great question. I mean, I think that men absolutely can benefit coming into therapy. The number one barrier to entry, I feel like, is men feeling like they're going to sit down and they're just going to hear a regurgitation of the view in front of them, right? To hate themselves. The reason why you're having all these problems is because you like to duck hunt and you have a bass boat and you drive a diesel. Like there's like, you're just raging toxicity, right? Because I'm sorry, I'm an innately male. And I think that if we're honest with ourselves, I know you're hearing this from your colleagues as well. Everyone's turning around and going, hey, the referrals are drying up. Like the phone's not ringing as much. What's funny is most people are focused on, well, it must be Google ads, it must be a better bio, it must be a better website. I think you have a large segment of the population that's simply telling you, we don't trust you anymore, right? And I don't think that trust would make much sense. If you sit and you pigeonhole people and you tell them that they're a basket of deplorables, and you tell them that they're misogynistic and that they're bigoted and they're backwards, why would they want to go spend any time with you?
So that's interesting, because as men are being repelled from therapy, it seems like men are needing therapy more than ever, because men's mental health is tanking.
Correct.
Mental health is worse, addiction's worse. Men dropping out of the labor force, dropping out of education. A lot of men saying, I don't want to date or marry because I don't see any kind of a future
Mm.
there for me. It seems like at a time when, therapy's never been needed more for men, that's when our mental health is the worst. What's going on with men's mental health that you see?
Men are really good at suffering in silence, and they're really good at being islands. And that's right now where we're at, is we're at probably, I would say, the late stage of isolation as a primary intervention in the lives of most males. We've just tried to suffer silently, don't blip on the radar, and we'll see how we come out of this. The problem is we've been doing it for 10 years, 20 years. It's been a while. I will tell you that, and people will argue with me, I think there's actually a ton of men that are willing to enter into quality therapy services if they can find a quality therapist.
Huh.
Because I'm not struggling for referrals. I'm not like, the phone hasn't stopped for me. The phone is ringing more. The difference, I feel like, is it's very easy to type Adam Luke into Google and look me up. You'll see every podcast I've ever been on. You'll see my website. You'll see my posts, and there's a consistency there. And like I tell people, I just want to be a resource in your life. And that also means that I don't come from the position of arrogance of believing I'm going to save you. I think you and I are going to find the tools necessary for you to save yourself.
Mm.
And
I feel
that's,
like,
again, empowerment. That's instead of, again, the beginning of the process of saying you're too dumb enough to do this yourself, so you need your therapist to do it. That's the message being shared right now.
I feel like just some of the language that you're using, empowerment, tools. I use the word tools a lot. Like, this is something for you to grab onto and take with you so that you can
Mhm.
solve your own problems out there. I feel like a more feminized version of therapy that is still good and useful in certain
Mhm.
circumstances is, let's just sit here and process with no necessarily goal in mind. Let's just kind of talk about our feelings. Sometimes that is necessary. I think that is one tool
Mhm.
that you need. I think a lot of times men see that. And I don't understand what our goal. Why am I doing this? Why am I being vulnerable? I don't see what kind of outcome am I pursuing.
I appreciate how you frame that, because, like, when I teach my students, when your client asks you, what the hell are we doing here? That doesn't mean they're not applying themselves enough. It means that we've lost the space as a therapist. Like, when you talk about building awareness, the language I use with clients is, we've got to sift. I've got to sift through things. We've got to find, like, where are the nuggets, where are the real things, because we're just dealing with a pile of just emotionally stuffed experiences. But you'll also hear me use words like, uh, you've heard me say empower, but I use a lot about power and influence. I feel like those two words, power and influence, very important in how people are experiencing society right now. because people are feeling powerless. And then people are not recognizing that even though you have things that do control your life, whether it's a need to go to school or a need to go to work or pay your mortgage or whatever, these things are obligations that we have to navigate. We forget that we have all these influences in the relationships around us. Like, my greatest takeaway in my legacy is not going to be the fact that I am paying Mr. Cooper every month to live in my house. That's not it. Okay. My greatest influence is going to be in bath time with my 2-year-old, how I love my wife, and how I take care of my 16-week-old. And all those things don't depend on who's in the White House, doesn't depend on who's the governor of your state, and doesn't depend on what bill did or did not pass. And so there are a lot of people that are sidestepping the responsibilities they have in the life that they live based off of these narratives they would like to accept for themselves, which is because I didn't get my way in everything means that I don't have to show up in any one thing.
Like that. So you got licensed 2015, is that right?
So I actually got licensed in 2020.
2020,
So
okay.
it was a long road for me because of also I got married in 2015, and so I also needed to find a way, how do I provide for a family? So I was working as a mechanic, and then in the afternoons, evenings, I would transition into being a therapist.
Gotcha,
So
okay.
it was funny because the guys that I worked with would always laugh. Right about 4 o'clock, I'd walk into the bathroom and then I'd walk out looking like Kent. Like, I was just like, all of a sudden I'm in a suit and whatnot, and they're like, "Yeah, that was weird. You were just in bibs a second ago." And it's like, there's plenty of times I sat down with clients and I looked at my hands and I saw a grease mark and I was like trying to cover the grease mark, right? But that's how I needed to do things.
So you've been in, around, or observing the therapy profession for a while, and I'm wondering how you've seen it change, specifically in like how it's become politicized in recent years.
Yeah, so the Donald Trump's first uh presidency, that I think I was really naive up until that point because I didn't feel these overt pressures in our field. I thought that we were all on the same bandwagon of just trying to help people better understand what they know, what they believe, and how they live their lives. And then what his presidency did is it sort of pulled the scales off of my eyes to realize that other people were being activist therapists, where they were actually encouraging more of their personally held beliefs in the space. And what I thought was interesting is I had always taken some flack in the therapy space for being a faith-based therapist. Christian therapists or anything with faith-based, whenever you go to larger conferences, it felt like less people wanted to have those conversations. But then when you start sitting there and recognizing, oh, wait a second, you're uncomfortable with my religion, but you're not uncomfortable with your religion of social justice or your religion of therapy. Like, people, I think that's the other aspect here, is we need to recognize that the reason why we're experiencing such a level of like conflict and extremism is because people aren't fighting for the science of psychology. They're fighting for what they believe is their ideology of psychology, of what therapy is as a religion. And that's why we're experiencing such a harsh thrashing right now of people are having to reconcile things that, no, this is their identity. Their identity, it's sad to think, is therapists may have been more interested at stroking their own virtue egos than making sure that their clients understood themselves. That worries me, because if you just change it around and you said that you're a Christian therapist and you force people into Christianity and that's the only way out, I'd still call you a shitty therapist. But you're not if, well, I'm doing it from the aspect of social justice because that's what we're called to. Is it? Because social justice isn't my client. My client is my client.
I've talked to quite a few conservative therapists, and I don't think, and Christian therapists as well, like, I don't think I've talked to anyone who any part of their mission is to push their beliefs on their client. but like it's an overwhelming progressive idea, not just, in the ether, but I find it directly out of my textbooks. I find it from the mouths of my
Mm.
professors. You are supposed to put a thumb on the scale in favor of social justice. That is very explicit. They're not trying to hide it. They're not trying to deny it. And I don't see there's an asymmetry here, because I don't see a similar thing coming from conservatives or Christians for their worldview. Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense. I had a client recently sort of check me up, and I appreciate it because they came in and they said, "Hey, my spouse saw a video you did and was completely frustrated with it." And I could feel the tension that this client was bringing in the room with him. And I said, "Well, I would like, please tell me, like, you talk about voting for Trump, you talk about being okay with this, that, and the other." And I sat and I said, "Well, I need to ask you a question." I said, "Before you discovered this video, have you ever felt that you saw that person in this room?" He's like, "Aspects of him." I was like, "Perfect. Tell me what." He's like, "I could hear your passion for helping people. I could see how excited you got when people would make big breakthroughs in their work." And he's like, "I've experienced those things." And I said, "Have I ever once asked you to vote for Donald Trump? No. Have I ever asked you what your political affiliations is? No." And I said, "Yeah, you heard me call out that I am a Christian, but have I ever required that out of you in this?" He said, "No." And I said, "Now just help me, because I need to know. Have I ever handicapped you in discussions because you didn't fit the narrative of what you saw in that video?" He said, "No." I said, "Well, thank God, because I want to make sure I'm a good therapist." But I said, "So what we're hearing is we're in this thought process of, because you disagree with me, I have to be your enemy." I said, "I understand if it will make more sense for you and your wife if you discontinue with me. I understand, but I will never think different of you. Like, that's not what I'm called to as a therapist. Like, if you're telling me," and I said, "I really need this out of you. I need you to tell me if this is going to stunt your work that we've been doing, then we need to find you someone else."
Hmm.
And I don't think that same thought process comes through, because I get those phone calls of, "Adam, I've been let go by my therapist." I was floored the first time I heard that. I said, "God, let go by your therapist? What? Oh, I told him that I voted for Trump." Oh, I disclosed the one that broke my heart was a couple years ago when Roe versus Wade was in Supreme Court, and I got a phone call and said, I disclosed to my therapist that I've always been uncomfortable with abortion, and they told me they could no longer work with me. Like, if that is there, that shows also how transactional these processes of therapy have been. As long as you will believe what I believe, you can keep paying me money and you can keep coming back. But the second that you may say something that challenges my belief, and trust me, I hear this all day long as a therapist. My clients will say things that challenge my personally held beliefs, but guess what? It doesn't matter, because my core beliefs are not their core beliefs, and my core beliefs, it doesn't give me some position of authority. And I think that's sadly what people are entering this field as they go, "Oh, as a therapist, then I get to tell other people how to think and behave and do." And you have a whole segment of the population as therapists that are just trying to run their own sim games of like, "Oh no, you do that and you'll be happy. You'll do that and you'll be happy." And it's interesting then when you're sitting in consultations with them that it's like, "Oh wow, blowing apart that client's marriage didn't actually make them feel better. That's weird." "Oh no, but it was because of all the misogyny. It was because her husband was an asshole." Her husband could have still been an asshole. I don't know about that, but I do know that, like, if she's saying that she's unhappy with the process, I don't think it's because she's not a believer. I think it's because it doesn't align with what she wants.
Hmm. So a few questions left. One is, it should be a softball for you. How do we fix the therapy profession?
Oh, there we go. How do we? So, you and I had the blessing of going to the AMHP conference, right? Um, those events for me are now necessities. They're not electives. How do we change the therapy industry? We have to be conscientious objectors. And that's what I'm being. I refuse to be silent. I refuse to go, oh man, I don't want to speak up because I don't know how it affects my license. My license is actually being dragged through the mud by allowing people who are incompetent to practice licensed as therapists. So I need to be a healthy disruptor. And that's why I'm no longer staying silent. I'm asking questions. I'm showing up. I'm trying to get people to point to me what logic they're using or the reasoning that they're using in these situations. Because having whatever has been born out of the last 15 years of psychology happening in a vacuum is not actually benefiting us.
So, if it's okay with you, I've got a few questions from our group chat.
Oh, yeah.
Jonathan Cogburn asks, "What's your favorite firearm?"
Ooh, good question. Favorite firearm? I love history, so I can't actually probably the M1 Garand is high up on that list, just for its significance in history of basically winning World War II for us. But then I absolutely my passion, if you were to talk about like what is my self-care, is I love long range shooting. So the gun I'm actually really a fan of right now is I have a Remington 707 millimeter mag that I have really been using over the last few years to become a better hunter and a better distance shooter.
Jake Freeman asks, "Are you willing to keep our group chat safe?"
Yes, absolutely. Because if it gets disclosed, I'll never be able to win the presidency. I'll never be able to. So yes, it is going to be silent, encrypted, and never released.
Nice. Okay. Jonathan Cogburn wants to know, will you retell the story of your emotionally damaging the lawyer at breakfast on at the conference?
I don't think that it would benefit the listeners at all. In short, what happened was I had an individual, and it happens all the time because I don't look like a therapist. Another stranger and I having a conversation. I said I was a therapist, and he said, "Who the hell wants to be a therapist?" And in my quick-witted response, I said, "You know what? I don't know, but it is extremely rewarding when your wife pays me $200 an hour." And from there, it went sideways, but it was wonderful. I feel like there was clarity and, beacon of hope. So
Nice. So we've also got a bunch of questions from DB Palmer, Jonathan Cogburn, and a lot from Jake Freeman that I will not read on here. You can read in the group chat.
I just want them to know that I tried so desperately to find a way to weave in the feminine penis and wasn't
That was what their question was about.
wasn't quite able to find how to stick that one in the old punch bowl, but here we are. So
there's a lot of questions about the feminine penis.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, last question for you. This is one I close out all the podcasts with. And when you look at society more broadly, what is one issue that we're not talking about enough that we should be talking about more?
I don't think that we have a seriousness in how we talk about human connection not being an elective. Like we're talking about AI a lot, but we're sidestepping the fact that like human connection and relationships cannot be electives. We have tried to find ways to sort of strip away the need for community. I think it first popped out in COVID, that somehow if we just shut down communities, it would be okay and we will all thrive. And it's funny for me to say this because I meet all my clients virtually, right? But the one thing that I do with my clients is I talk about the need for you to have physical connection with other human beings. And I think that actually scares a lot of establishments because if we get a lot of strangers around campfires or backyards and we start having conversations with one another, all of a sudden we're not that different. There was a time where I was a field-based therapist in LA, and I worked in Compton, Watts, Inglewood, the worst areas, quote unquote, of LA. And at the same time, I was doing private practice work with clients that were in Beverly Hills. And what I was always blown away by is like during the day, I could be with clients that, again, are living in Section 8 housing, primarily only getting their needs met through social welfare programs, and their concerns about their communities and the world their kids were going to grow up in, and the worries that they had for their kids were the same as people who were living not that far away from Rodeo Drive. So that's the other side of me being a disruptor. Of I want to call out that there's a need for more people to sit down and talk with each other instead of hearing through the different lenses, social lenses, who different segments of the population are.
I like that a lot. Well, Adam Luke, the academically weaponized redneck, loved having you on. Loved our conversation.
Thank you so much, Ryan. It's a blessing to be able to get on, and thank you for what you do and just allowing our voices to have a space.